And we are live. Welcome, fellow unbelievers, friends, family, and anyone else that might be watching. I'm pretty sure my family isn't watching. Some of them don't really appreciate this, but anyways. Today I'm talking with Luciano Gonzalez. He is, you're a blogger, correct?
Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to identify me.
well, you've had your blog for quite some time, as I've seen.
Yeah, my blog is like solid.
Yeah, totally it is. I've actually checked it out just recently. So, and also we're going to hear Luciano's deconversion story here. So what I basically like to do is I ask my victims, as some of my friends are calling them nowadays, at what point did you sort of start to feel like this was make-believey, nonsensey kind of stuff? And from that point on, what led you to the activist that you've become today?
So my story is a little bit unusual, and like I'm gonna classify it as a story that's probably somewhat boring, but like there are enough things that like don't mesh that people could be interested in like specific parts. So when I was a Christian, I was a younger individual. I was a Christian from when I was born until I was about 19-ish. That was the year I realized that I was an atheist. But in between that, there was a period where I was super interested in mythology and in like paganism, and I was one of those people that I think it was Inordinate Refraction who first told me the word omnist, which is someone who, oh yeah, all the religions are like kind of true, or it's like some that there's like some truth to all religions. But the way that it was for me was like, oh yeah, other gods exist, but the God I believe in is like the real God, I guess.
Totally fake. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I thought you were gonna say totally fake. I was in the same boat, dude. I did the whole pagan thing, and fuck, I even called myself a Wiccan at one point. So
I actually get along really well with like folks who are polytheistic and folks who are like pagan and Wiccan, and it's because I am an atheist, but I'm far more a secular humanist and a secularist than I am an atheist. So for me, it's not like, yeah, atheism is important. I am an atheist, but I'm not going to go around focusing on that part of my identity. And I think that that's part of the reason why I have pals who are like all over the spectrum. Even like conservative Christians can get along with me, provided that they're like, yeah, we don't care about people who are LGBT. We're not going to go around telling them that they're going to go to hell or anything. As long as they're not like that, I can get along with just about anyone in terms of religion. And I think that like part of the reason for that is that I focus more on making sure that we can all like have a shared community, as opposed to being atheism is true. Although I am I am surprisingly harsh towards religion. People probably think that I'm softer than I actually am. But what happened with me was when I went to college, I started to be interested in other religions. I was always interested in other religions, but I started to be like really interested in figuring out what was true as opposed to what it was that people believed. And for me, that meant looking up arguments from different religions, researching different texts, and trying to figure out what made the most sense logically. And I started listening to atheist videos when I was a freshman in college. I started listening to people like Jacqueline Glenn and the Amazing Atheist, and also Hemant Mehta, which was really interesting because years later, I would actually get a chance to like start interacting with Hemant Mehta, since we're both writers over on Patheos. And he was like the first person that I ever saw who was an atheist, who was also like super positive, because Jacqueline Glenn at the time was somewhat of an anti-theist. The Amazing Atheist has always, at least to me, always been an anti-theist. So for me, seeing like different
I'd agree.
Yeah, seeing like different spectrums of disbelief and seeing different reactions to theism from atheists really helped me. The actual moment that I realized that I was an atheist, this is one of my favorite parts of my deconversion story, so I feel like it's interesting to right in with it. I went to go see the movie God's Not Dead with my girlfriend.
Oh my God, Hold it. You wasted your money on that?
I was a believer. So like I was like, yeah, this
Oh,
movie
okay.
is like this movie is going to be the movie for me. And I was already like having a crisis of faith at the time. So like when I saw
Okay.
the advertisements for all of that, I got really excited. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I need. I went into that movie theater, a Christian who was like, yeah, God's real. Jesus is the Lord and Savior, all of the stereotypical non-denominational Christian stuff. And then I literally left that movie and I was like, I'm an atheist.
So the movie turned you into one?
No, like for me, I was already on the fence and I was like,
Oh, okay.
so then seeing that movie, the actual thing that happened in the movie, I'm gonna spoil it, but it's like 6 years, it's like 5 years old now. So
Mm-hmm.
no big deal if I spoil it. But at the
No.
end, the anti-theistic weird professor guy gets hit by a car. And instead of like calling for help, the Christian pastor, who's like one of the side characters, sees him and runs over to him and is like, hey, you're going to die now, but if you die in your sins, you're going to go to hell. And I think you believe that God's real. So I'm going to ask you to like accept Jesus into your heart. And he does. And for me, that was like the most insidious thing ever, because what in effect it was is like if you're an atheist and you have a deathbed conversion, like that's the end goal of some types of Christians. And that was a really extreme reaction, but that was the message that it was sending. So for me, it's like, yeah, I can't be a part of this anymore, especially since I know that it's not real. I shouldn't be lying to myself. So I actually told my girlfriend, who I would continue to date for like another 5 years after that, I was like, yeah, I'm an atheist. And like she would become an atheist later on, and she was actually raised non-theistically. But for her, that was hard because at the time she was still Catholic.
Oh, wow. Was she hardcore? Or?
She was definitely like she was a believer. She really meant it. She really believed in all of it, but it was partially because she was trying. Like it wasn't something that came easily or intuitively to her. She wasn't raised in Catholicism despite the fact that she's a Latina. Her mom is a believer and didn't know that because of the way she was raised, like they never went to church or anything, especially not for several years. Like they started going to church when she was a teenager, and it was partially because of her that they started going to church, because she wanted to be a believer since all the other people that she knew in her community were believers. She was trying to like get herself into it. So like I told her mom that I was an atheist, and she's like, atheists don't exist. And then that was the moment that she was just like, Jessica, the person who it was just like, all right, I'm not going to tell my mom about this, because if I do, yeah, that's the reaction I'm going to get. And it's cool if it's you, because, you know, you're not a biological member of the family, but I don't want that to happen to me. And it was like a really big scarring moment for her.
Wow.
But yeah, I actually came out to my family. I just got, that's a very nice, there's a very nice conversation going on in the comment section right now. But a lot of my beliefs, a lot of my beliefs actually came from my family, and I was raised in a casually Catholic family. My mom and dad are both believers, but like they have different levels of skepticism and they don't accept everything, which is part of the reason why like my family was relatively cool with me being a non-believer. They were just like, oh, it sucks that you're a non-believer, but they didn't like do anything about it. They were just like, we can accept it.
Oh, that's cool. So they weren't trying to like bring you back into the flock kind of thing.
I think it's because like my family were raised, like both my mom and my dad were raised in theistic communities. We're Puerto Rican. Puerto Rico is very heavily like it's very heavily theistic. There are more and more atheists now, especially in the wake of the hurricane. Like we've become surprisingly vocal, which is nice. And we've also like we've gotten some pushback. There have been individuals who've been less than pleasant towards Puerto Rican atheists. But for the most part, like Puerto Rico isn't this place where like atheists are suffering all this discrimination, which is interesting because there was a possibility that wasn't going to be the case.
I suppose so, yeah. But what about the government there? Do they push religious stuff, or
They do, which is
oh, do
unfortunate.
they?
So
Would you say they're a theocracy, or?
no, I feel like saying
Okay.
that they're a theocracy is definitely going like a bit far. They definitely want, like, there are individuals who want it to be a theocracy, and there's also individuals who want to be able to pretend that it's a theocracy, because like this is something that people who've lived in theocratic environments have no doubt noticed. There are individuals who are pushing theocratic policies who like really believe them, and then there's individuals who push theocratic policies that just want the popularity that comes from a certain segment of the electorate for pushing these sorts of policies. And I feel like Puerto Rico probably has more of the latter than the former, which is helpful.
Right.
But that doesn't stop politicians from being like, "Hey guys, we should institute a period of prayer and mandatory fasting," which was actually a thing that happened in the wake of the hurricane. And groups like the Atheistas de Puerto Rico and the Humanistas Seculares de Puerto Rico, so the two really big, like, secular Puerto Rican groups, pushed back and pushed back hard. And I was one of the people who helped be like, "Hey, this is what's going on in Puerto Rico. This is why you should pay attention." And I have friends in both groups, as well as being like an unofficial member of the Atheistas de Puerto Rico, which is really helpful because I get to like talk with people and I get to know what's going on in Puerto Rico, despite living in DC, which is where I live and work right now.
I guess up until you were in DC, you lived in Puerto Rico?
I was actually raised in Puerto Rico, Honduras, Colombia, and Panama. My dad's in the military, and my mom was up until I was born as well. So they got married. She stayed in the military, and then when I was born, she left. And I was raised in the Bible Belt and in Latin America because my dad would get deployed to Latin America. And if you're deployed to Latin America in the military, depending on what branch you're in, odds are your family's going to go with you as well.
Makes sense. What did he do in the military, by the way?
So he's still in the military right now. He works in DC. And what he did in Latin America was just like a couple of different things. He would usually just work with like Latin American militaries and help coordinate stuff between the United States and whatever Latin American country he was in at the time. And that was made for an interesting childhood, especially because I was fully bilingual growing up. I was able to read and write fluently in Spanish. I can now read fluently in Spanish. I can speak in like almost fluent Spanish, but my writing is not good.
So I bet nowadays English would be your first language rather than Spanish, or?
Yeah, I know the very basics of a handful of others, but I'm not good enough that like if someone's like, "Haha, read this." I mean, I could read the letters, but I wouldn't be able to like tell you what they meant unless you like gave me a second.
Right. Well, you know what? Just being able to speak language is awesome. I know like a smidge of French, and we were forced to do it in high school, speak Hebrew. So that kind of blows people away. But I lived in Israel for 2 years back in the early 80s.
That's really neat.
Yeah, I did grade 11 and 12 there. So imagine our graduating party, because it was a small group of Americans / Canadians that were there. And our whole graduating party consisted of about 7 people. So it was quite the piss up, though, I got to tell you that. Because in Israel, there's no real drinking age. They kind of get iffy if you look like you're under 13, but anything above that, the kind of an age look, they're like, "Oh yeah, here, have a shandy or have a beer or whatever." As a matter of fact, there are some holiday. Purim would be one of the holidays over there, where if you're walking around in Jerusalem, they will literally, if there's a party going on, they will literally see you and grab you and pull you into the party and stuff a bottle of wine in your hand and then make you join the big hora dance that they do all night long, which is what turned out to be kind of fun. But Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the way it was there.
So for me,
yeah, speaking more than one language is rare nowadays with people.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I had a really interesting like high school experience because the way that it was I was born in North Carolina, but then I moved to Panama and then to Georgia and then Colombia and then back to North Carolina. And I actually started high school in North Carolina, and I thought when I started I'd be able to finish it there. But then my dad got orders to go to Honduras, which is where I spent the majority of my time in high school, but I didn't even get to graduate there. I moved my last semester to Georgia, and because this sometimes confuses people, I moved to Georgia the state, not Georgia the country. I was in a high school in Georgia for one.
Because there is a country, Georgia.
Yeah, there is a country in like the Soviet. It's in the former Soviet bloc. Yeah, I just had to check for a second. But I spent one semester in a high school in Georgia, which was very confusing to a lot of people who just like, where have you lived the last 5 years? And now it's been over 5 years since then. So I don't have to like write out that whole thing. But when I was first in college and I was applying for jobs, they had this thing where it's like, where have you lived in the last 5 years? That is a complicated question, friends.
Let's break out Google Maps and I'll show you. Because I've been everywhere.
So many places.
yeah. There's still some places I gotta hit eventually, you know, tripwise or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been to I've been to, let's see, the European continent in a bunch of places. I've been to the Asian continent, mostly Middle Eastern. I've been on the African continent, the South American continent, the North American continent. I have not yet been to the Australian continent, and I have absolutely no desire to go to the Antarctic either. So, but yeah, there's one we'll say doable continent left for me, and that's Australia. But not just offered to put me up for a couple of weeks if I do come down there and visit them. So that's cool.
I've never left this. I've left this hemisphere if we're talking about the northern hemisphere. I haven't left this hemisphere if we're talking about the western hemisphere. That's like the easiest way.
So basically you've just been like North and South America your whole life, right?
Yeah. I've lived in Central America, and like that's actually where I spent like I guess my formative years, because that was where I was when I was a teenager. And that's honestly like a different experience. That's like honestly a different experience than a lot of people expect it to be. I repeated myself because my brain like shut off for a second, which is not a good sign.
What, have you been lacking sleep or something?
So I did last night, but I had time to go to sleep before this. So like thought I was okay, but I'm gonna get some sip of water to see if that helps.
You're doing fine so far, man. It's all the excitement about doing the talk, I guess.
This is always like a fun experience for me because I told like my deconversion story. I was one of the first guests on a friend of mine's podcast, and his name is Steve. He runs the Voices of Deconversion podcast. He has like a really cool thing. He is a former Christian. I don't remember enough of his bio to do it justice, so I'm not going to. That was the first time I ever sat down and like talked about this at length. And we started like all the way from the beginning. And I feel like starting from the end probably makes more sense for me because everything is like so strange in my experience. I went to 2 Christian schools growing up. I went to one in North Carolina and I went to one in Honduras. And I know for a fact that if I call the one in Honduras a Christian school, it's going to annoy some people, but it was. That's just an accurate description. And the one in North Carolina was the one where I spent 2 years when I was in middle school. And that was when I was like my most firm a believer. The school taught me like young earth creationism. It was like a really literal biblical schools. And like the whole thing was like, hey, we believe the Bible is true. The Bible should be interpreted literally. It was an interesting place to go, but unfortunately, because I never took religion all that seriously before then, it really like messed me up because I didn't know enough about religion, especially about Christianity, to be like firm in my position. So I was really easy to move to, I guess, like the right. And that was what the school did for me. It was after that that I started being like more skeptical, because people would destroy me when I tried to have conversations about religion and about like politics when I was a little kid, which is not the case now, even when I have like debates. But when I was younger, I just didn't know enough. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to learn more. But being in that school, like, it made me angry when I first left religion, because I was like, I lost so many friends having these sorts of positions that I now know are false. But like, I didn't before. And because I wasn't smart enough to be able to defend these positions rationally, friends stopped being my friend, because these were like bad positions. These weren't like, oh yeah, Christianity is true, heaven's real. This is like young earth creationism, which is a whole different ball game. And it's really frustrating for me even now when I think about it.
Well, so how many times have you done this? Like told your story?
So this is the second time I've been on a podcast or like on like a stream of some sort where I have like a conversation that's centered around it. But I've had friends where I've had like long running conversations where I've talked about my deconversion. Although this is also the first time that it's been like a live stream that other people could see. So that makes it different in a whole other way.
Yeah, but you're pretty much out to everyone that matters in your life anyway, so that's not a big deal to you anymore. You can come on and be, hey, look at me, right? So airing any real repercussion.
Well, like, part of it is also that I've been lucky enough that I've actually been able to earn money while working in the atheist community, which is something that not a whole lot of people, unless they're like YouTubers, can say. I work for the American Atheists right now, and I've been working for them for the last couple of months. My time with them, like, awesome. I'm an intern, so my internship is about to end, but it's still been like a really wonderful experience for me. And it's also been really nice to have a job where it's like, yeah, I'm an atheist, and that doesn't negatively affect me.
That's great, dude. I did not know that about you, that you were a member of the American Atheists.
Yeah.
I just became a member of Canadian Atheists, actually. Well, it was easy. And don't tell anyone, but I don't have to pay any membership fees because I know the guy that owns it. But anyways, him and I are actually going to be starting our own call-in show, very much like the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen and stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was good. I think I've been trying to see if there have been any other examples online, but I don't think there has been a call-in show like that yet in Canada. So we'll be pioneers on that. So it should be pretty interesting. And just so people that are watching, that are friends of mine and stuff that know about this, eventually we'll be having guest hosts pop in and out, like Armin Navibi, who actually I think lives here in our city. We'd love to have him in there to talk to theists and whatnot. So that's something that we'll be doing as well. So have you ever done anything like that? Have you ever been on a show like that where people call in?
I actually have. I was on The Road to Reason, which is a show. So the episode that I was on, no one called in, but it's a show that you can call into, and it's a local show in Virginia that is hosted by some of the local atheists. At the time, it was David Tamayo, the president of the Hispanic American Freethinkers, and myself. And it was a really fun experience because we were talking about the importance of skepticism in the real world, aside from like, oh yeah, someone is a believer in a religion and that's bad and that's dangerous. Like, we were talking about practical examples of skepticism.
Right. Well, that's great. Religious believers, the average Joe type believer in religious beliefs, so to speak, it's just when they get into positions of power, like in politics and stuff, that can lead to some pretty nasty shit, right? So that's why we fight against the merging of church and state as much as possible, which I agree. And it's not happened to that degree up in Canada, not as close as you guys seem to be heading down in the States right now.
Yeah, that's true. We have a Dominionist as the vice president, which is very dangerous.
Yeah, which is kind of freaky, man. I don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully, and there's a little bit of good news, I guess, with the midterm Looks like it could be going towards Trump maybe not winning a second term, which would be guys. But I don't think Hillary's the answer, and I don't know. I'm not even sure if she's running again.
So apparently she is like prepping for another run. I don't know if she actually is. I have friends who've done work on her campaign. Like I'm friends with some of the Latinx folks, some of the Latino, Hispanic people who did like Spanish stuff for her. And it's honestly
like translating stuff, or
well, both translating stuff and like being a spokesperson for her in Hispanic communities, like especially North Carolina, which was the state that I went to college in and the state I lived in for the longest time. Like we knew people who were directly affiliated with her campaign at a pretty high level, but they were just like, oh yeah, we do stuff in Spanish and we outreach to like Hispanic organizations. And they haven't indicated that she's running yet, but I'm pretty sure, honestly, that she's probably going to.
She probably will, I imagine, because I don't know about you, but I'd probably be sick to my stomach knowing that I got beat out by that clown. So, I mean, let's face it, she's got experience in politics at least, and he had none. Like it still boggles my mind how that guy made it in there. It just boggles my mind.
I don't say much in defense of Hillary Clinton because for a variety of reasons, I'm not her biggest fan. I voted for her. Like, make no mistake. I was willing to swallow my pride. And I was like, yeah, no, Trump, I'm not going to let Trump be the president if it's up to me. But she did win the popular vote. And that's not how the presidents, that's not how the president's picked in this country for worse, because it's not a for better or worse. It's just a bad system. But like, it's important that people realize that like she was not the person that the American people chose. Or he wasn't the person, in case I said she.
Well, I don't know. You guys are just, oh man, I cry for you guys almost daily with some of the shit that I see this clown.
I'm a very political person, so believe me, I do too.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's true too. So you were saying earlier that you see your family, when they found out that you were an atheist, they didn't really fly off the handle, which I think is pretty cool. Was there any family members that, because often you hear that people get almost like disowned by family members. Has that happened for you with anyone in your family?
So there are definitely family members who are not fans of mine. And not just because of my atheism, because like I'm an extremely public person. I want to run for office one day, which is part of it. But also like I'm over here constantly being as public as possible about a whole bunch of different things. And I'm doing that because like when I run for office, I don't want anyone to like come up and surprise people or surprise me and be like, haha, here's an embarrassing story from your past that you didn't expect. So like my atheism and my political views, I've had family members who are just like, hey, I'm not a fan of yours. You're kind of not a family member to me. But like the rest of my family has been like, hey, don't do that. That's not nice.
No. Well, I'll never understand that mode of thinking where just because you don't share a belief system the same as some of your family members, that they decide that you're not worth it to them anymore. It's like, dude, that's why they often say, that your real family doesn't necessarily have to be blood related to you, right?
Yeah. Part of it is also the fact that like I am over here inspiring other family members, because I'm not the only non-believer in my family, but I am the only one who's public. Like I've had family members come up to me and be like, hey, just so you know, there's certain family members who are less than enthusiastic about the fact that you are a non-believer and you are public about it. But also like I have your back because I'm also a non-believer and I didn't want to be public about it because I knew that what's sort of happening to you would have happened to me. So that definitely helps. But I also apparently have a family member who was an academic and was an atheist, but is now like died before I was born. So that's part of the reason why in my mom's case, my mom was like, yeah, it's fine that you're a non-believer. I am a believer. I hope that doesn't change your opinion of me. And I'm just like, it doesn't. You've always been a believer my entire life. So that wouldn't really make much sense.
Well, I guess then her knowing family that was already a non-believer kind of, you might say that the person that you never met because he died before, or was it he or she? He?
It was a he as far as I know. I actually should probably ask my mom some more details about that because he was apparently an interesting person. But she was just like, yeah, cool. You had like a great uncle and he was an out and open believer. So
okay. So that kind of smoothed it for you. So
yeah,
it wouldn't be so shocking for your mom, I guess.
I actually, I wrote down the account from when I first told my mom, because like the actual story of when I first told my mom is funny to me, even if it's like a fairly mundane thing. The first time I went home from college after I became a non-believer was that summer. I was only home for like 2 weeks because I was living out of state. So when I went home, I went out of North Carolina into Georgia where my family was living. And the first day that I was back, my mom and I were in a car. We were driving home after going to get something to eat. And she started talking to me about religion. And that day I was like, I should probably tell my mom that I'm a non-believer, but I don't want to like start the conversation. So she talks about religion. I'll say I'm a non-believer. And of course, she talked about religion.
It's like they can't help it sometimes. You know what? I just
anything mean or anything, but she was just like, "Yeah, I just want to talk about prayer," and I'm just like, "I don't."
Oh yeah, it doesn't do anything. So, like, did you show her all the studies about intercessory prayer and stuff that they do?
I know of some of them, but like I don't care about them because honestly, I know that that's not going to convince people that they don't work. That's not the way to tell people that prayer is ineffective.
Hang on 1 second, Luciano. Hang on. Duke, leave Fred alone. He's got a right to say what he wants. We may not agree with him, and you might think that he's kind of crashing the party here, but let him say what he messages from this Fred Gwynn guy earlier about how come we're not defending atheism. All we're doing is talking about deconversion stories. But that's what I do on this channel, Fred. So you're just going to have to get used to that. If you want to see me talking about atheism and trashing on religion and stuff like that, you'll have to follow me on Twitter. But eventually I'll do another series of videos where you can come in here and throw your arguments down in the comments, and my friends will trounce on you from there.
So
for now, it's deconversion stories.
Fred person is a theist?
Yeah, I guess. Or he's just heard so many of these, he's kind of bored with them. I don't really know. But yeah, but he was timed out by Duke for 300 seconds. What an odd number to choose to time somebody out, but that's kind of funny. Sorry, Fred. My friends can be a little on the defensive side, which I actually like. But yeah, Duke, leave him alone. Let him spew his nonsense in the comments. I don't care. It's everyone's got the freedom to speak what's on their mind. At least here in North America, they do, anyways. And we don't want to lose that. Doesn't matter. You don't have to read it.
You're kind of roboting on my end. So if
am I? Sorry.
Like it's not super fierce. It's not like on Wonder Lady's channel where Christy sometimes like robots out for like almost a minute. And I love both of them so much. But like
I know, yeah, they're great.
Thing that happens.
Yeah, it can happen. We've got pretty good internet here, so but it does when everyone in the area starts bogging down the baud rate, or the band rate, it can get a little bit like that here. And weekends is the worst. Anyways, where were we? Oh yeah, you and your mom were having discussions there.
Yeah, my mom was like, My mom was interested in me becoming an atheist, but like I remember her first reaction, and it'll always make me laugh. It kind of hurt my feelings when she first said it, but like now it's just funny to me because now I know she didn't mean anything by it. But since I went to two different Christian schools, she was just like, "But you went to those Christian schools. You were part of like the Bible club. How could you be a non-believer?" And like it was a question in good faith, but like when you're nervous about being like, yo, I'm a non-believer, and you first hear that, like it kind of makes sense that it's kind of gonna hurt, especially if you're someone who like values your family's opinion and your family's like insights into these sorts of things. And it took me a while to like get over that because I was like sensitive since I was really nervous about coming out to it, or like since I was really nervous about coming out about that. Since in my family, like there are people who are studying religion and who have like master's degrees in divinity and theology, I feel like that definitely doesn't help. There's like added.
I've always thought that was just divinity, masters in divinity. It's always. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you start to say something, and then it just roboted.
And then I roboted. Oh, sorry. I was saying I've always found it kind of interesting that they have masters for stuff like divinity. Like, to me, it's just what? When you pick something real like science or something, I don't know. Just
I'm
weird,
like frustrated about that too because I'm actually a graduate student. I'm studying peace and conflict studies at like the graduate level. And for me, like I know that my field, it falls along the lines of either an interdisciplinary field or like a social science, depending on who you're talking to. So I know that like there are a lot of people who are going to be like, oh yeah, what you're studying isn't real either. So I kind of sympathize. Like I kind of sympathize with people who are like getting master's degrees in divinity, but at the same time I get really annoyed because it's like, yeah, no, I want to run for office and I want to own a business that actually helps people resolve conflicts. And like there are specific things that we can do. Like there are proven methods to end conflicts that are effective. I would know since I'm studying them. And there's no, like, you can't say the same thing with a master's degree in divinity.
No. Causes probably more conflict than it solves, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really good that you're doing something like that. We need more people doing stuff like that so that there's not as much conflict in this world. Because there's a shit ton of it and it gets really, annoying sometimes, or disheartening, I think is a better word. There's conflicts all over the place, man. And it's strange because when I lived in Israel, the conflict there wasn't as bad as it is now. And I'm very much against a lot of the shit that they're doing to those Palestinian peoples because I had many friends that were Palestinian or whatever they call it, and Lebanese and stuff. And at that time, there was more of an issue with Lebanese people. When I was there, they were constantly at war with them. Not like war, but back and forth. But yeah, and it's tragedy what's going on there on both sides, really. I mean, there's shit that's going on, evil shit that's going on both sides. But
yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So it's really good, and I really wish that more people would take up something like that to kind of curb all the harsh crap and anger, and most of it is due to misunderstandings, really, if you think about it. So
that's actually something that I talk and write about a whole lot because for me, like what I am at my core is a communicator, whether it's writing blog posts, writing tweets, making videos, or like working on academic papers. I'm actually working on a paper like as soon at like after the after party, I'm going to be like going back to working on an academic paper that's due tomorrow night. So like
what's the topic?
So the topic that I'm doing it on is the Guatemalan genocide, also known as the Silent Holocaust, which was an event that happened in the 1980s. You probably know about this, but in case anyone else doesn't, what happened was there was a civil war in Guatemala that lasted from 1960 to 1996. So from when my dad was born to when I was born. And towards the end of it, in the last like 15 or 16 years, there started to be an intensification of this conflict and the repression of citizens, specifically citizens who were ethnically Mayan. And it heated up to the point where there was a 5-year period that it was considered an actual genocide, like a quantifiable genocide of indigenous Mayan people. And the paper that I'm doing right now, I'll be publishing it in my own blog like in a couple of weeks if anyone wants to read it. But the paper that
check it out for sure
is studying like the transitional process to help people recover from the genocide and to help like people move on from the damages that was done, which is kind of impossible, but it's talking about the ways that the government went about trying.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. How do you recover from something like that? I think you're pretty much going to be scarred for life, if you ask me. Yeah.
People.
Oh man, this stuff gets me.
I know it's really brutal. Like I have a feeling that people think that if I'm trying to think of like the right way to word this. I have a feeling people think of something like peace and conflict studies as like a really as a field that it's not. People tend to think of it as like a soft thing, and that people who study peace and conflict studies are like, I guess, almost SJW type people. But peace and conflict studies has been around for decades. And also, like, people who study peace and conflict studies have gone on to be academics, politicians. They've gone on to be, like, spokespeople for the Department of Defense and for the Department of the State. Like, this is a really important field, and the people who do it and the people who are in it are really hardcore. Like, this isn't a field for soft people.
It's an important topic, really, or it's an important... oh, what's the word I'm looking for? See, I hate it when this happens. Don't get old, people. It sucks. It's just, more people, I think, should at least take it because it does talk or go into much better methods for people. Well, you know what I mean? Like, fuck, the word I'm trying to find is just not coming to me.
I understand like what you're trying to say.
It's you learn about these kinds of things from our history in these courses, right? The conflicts that have happened, the way they were resolved. You learn about peaceful times and how they were maintained. All this kind of stuff, and I think everyone should at least look into it, if not study it, because it might make for much better relations around the globe, really, if you ask me, right?
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely part of the intention. I think it's an interesting field to study. I think that if people, like, in a sense, it's almost applied communication, especially if you're not studying it on like a society or community-wide scale. You're just like, I want to know how to prevent conflicts or recover from conflicts in my personal relationships. Like, then it's basically just communication that's like applied.
True enough. Just thinking. Okay, first of all, how long have you been studying that?
So I've been studying it at the graduate level since the start of the summer. So I've been studying it as a graduate student for the last, I'm going to say seven-ish months. But when I was an undergraduate student, I got a degree in history and anthropology. And part of that is that I got really interested in peace and conflict studies too late to switch.
Wow, how was that? How was the anthropology? That's another interest of mine. A huge one is the anthropology. How was that for you?
So anthropology was fun for me, and I feel like anthropology, both of these things were the things that ended up getting me into peace and conflict studies. Because when I was studying history, I was like, I really like history. I like knowing about history, but I want something that can help me. I want something that can help me help people. And history by itself can, but it's really difficult to do like it's really difficult to do that sort of work, because you have to have like a
Mhm.
really high degree. You have to have like a specific type of like mind and a specific career history so that you can be in what's called public history, which is history like outside of academia. And that was the history I wanted to
Okay.
get into. And then anthropology was giving me the skills that I needed that would actually let me help people. Because when I was studying
Yeah.
anthropology, I was actually learning like how to communicate with the outside world and how to apply academics in a way that's actually useful for society, instead of being like, oh yeah, I work in a university and I get funding to teach college students. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what I wanted to do.
Right, right, right. You actually wanted to get out there and actually make a difference with
Yeah.
the education that you've got. And anthropology and history combined are almost really, if you think about it, it's like once you learn about both of them, it's like a slide into what you have gotten into as a graduate.
Yeah.
Right, right. So that's pretty cool. Um, to learn history is important, and I think we learn from our mistakes, right? So if you bone up on
Mhm.
history, then we're more likely to not repeat the same atrocity as a race of humans over this past, well, 20,000 odd years or whatever. Anyways, as a civilization. Anyways, I mean, I guess it's more closer to 10,000. This, I think, is basically when we started to settle down and make farms and stuff.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Chris Gesagt, that In a Nutshell video series?
No, I'm not.
Oh, they had an idea. They want to make a new calendar. Instead of it being 2,000, so it'd be 12,000
Yeah.
something years,
Oh,
right?
I'm
Which I thought
familiar
was
with like
great.
I'm familiar with that idea. I didn't know like the people behind it. I personally support that idea because I think that like our
I
current
do too.
system is very confusing, and also like it's a coincidence that our current system is like based off of when Jesus supposedly was born. I had to think for a second.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and like people don't realize that it's a coincidence and that's just the most convenient way. And since we've been doing that for so long, we just decided to continue doing it. But really, like
Mhm.
that idea that you communicated just now about like changing the calendar makes so much sense and is honestly a thing we should do. But it would annoy people who are currently in
I
power.
agree.
And it sucks we're not going
Who
to do it.
cares? You know what? Don't say we're not going to do it, because I think eventually it could happen. As I think, as a society, I think we are
Mhm.
becoming more and more secular, right? Because if you look at the millennials nowadays, a lot of them are non-religious or don't identify with any religion, and that's a plus. And that number is growing too. I just read a recent article on that, of how the numbers are even growing even more and almost faster now. I think people are just tired of it, to be honest. That's what I think it's boiling down to, is they're just tired of being dictated what's right and wrong to them by people of the cloth, so to speak. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Even in like usually even in societies that have been generally conceived to be hyper religious, like the Hispanic / Latino community, people who don't identify with any particular religion make up a fifth of modern day like young Hispanic Americans, which is a
Yeah,
far
great.
higher number than people expect, even if the number of people who are explicitly atheists and agnostics is only, I think, between the two of them 5%. But that's still a lot
Mm.
more than people realize.
Those numbers are a lot bigger than 20 years ago. I think the stats were atheists only, or agnostics only, made 1.5% of the population. So if you think in the past 20 years, that number has grown pretty good, and it's just going to get bigger, if
Yep.
you ask me, right? So closing in, we got about 10 minutes to the end of the hour, and I heard you say earlier about an after party, so I guess you're down for hanging out in an after party for a little bit.
I am. I don't know if I am going to, I don't know how long I'm going to be staying, but I'll definitely come in and have some fun.
Well, well, just so you know, and just so everyone else knows, so they don't give me shit later. I can only do an after party for about an hour, because it is my sister's birthday as well, and I was
Oh,
waiting to the end
nice.
to talk about this. Hang on. So we're gonna go, and she already did her big immediate family dinner thing. So we're going for some cake and cocktails after this. By the way, guys, also it was Luciano's birthday. Well, my sister. So everyone wish him a happy birthday, and I was waiting for that directly to you. Happy birthday, good sir, and I wish you many, many more.
Thank you.
Now, before we end this section of the whatever this is, chat podcast. I don't know if I call them podcasts because technically, is this really a podcast on YouTube? Is that what you would call this?
I mean, so there are some folks who do call theirs like a little podcast. I know Cirrus and Ocean, when I was on their live stream thing, they called it a podcast. And I feel like this is an alternative podcast. It might not be like
no alternative podcast. I don't want to be shoved in the same boat as like yeah, but then I think right away I think of alternative medicine. Which listen, there's no alternative medicine
podcast.
I just call it my show. This is my show. This is what I do. Right. So now my out for you. If you could that you regret doing that you could take back, I mean, letting people, is there any people that you wish you hadn't told or you know, that sort of thing? Is there anything that you regret about letting people know that you are an atheist?
So there are people, I'm trying to think of like the right way to communicate this idea, because I've thought about this before. I lost a really good friend when I first came out as an atheist. And it really sucks because like there were friends I had who were Christian that I stopped being friends with because they aggressively approached me about Christianity and the fact that I wasn't a Christian anymore. But the person, like the one person whose friendship I actually kind of regret losing was a fellow college student who was in the same year as me, who was a theist. And she and I never had any conversations about religion. We hung out in the same like communities. We were both Christians. But then when I became an atheist and I first spoke out about it, she stopped being my friend. And she told people that that was why. And I'm just like,
really?
It blows my mind. Because like other friends of ours,
every time.
Other friends, I'm sorry if it seems like I'm randomly cutting you off, by the way. It is the roboting. So sometimes
no. It's all right, man. These are kind of, we're always like a second behind each other or something anyway. So it's fine. I have no problem with that kind of thing, man. It's I'm interviewing you, so you have the right to the floor more than I do.
But what happened with her was like, I think that some of our friends who aggressively approached me probably made it seem worse than it actually was, because all it really was, and at least in my perception, I guess obviously their perception is going to be different, but like they came up to me in some cases like face to face, but usually like over messages, and they like aggressively questioned me about leaving Christianity. And I
was it hostile?
It was in some cases. And then there were other cases where like it started off as hostile and then it became less so. But I think that some of them went over to her and would like talk to her and made it sound worse than it was. But some of our friends who were not believers or who were non-believers approached her later on and they asked her and she said this like, yeah, he's really mean to religion, so I'm not his friend anymore. And that, it honestly kind of hurt, because like I wasn't even that mean to religion. Like even when
is it mean or is pointing out the reality that it's mythology? I guess they take that as mean.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely one way to look at it.
That's the way I've and I say that a lot when I talk to theists and believers and whatnot. I said, listen, you're essentially, I mean, if you look at human history, how many gods have there been? Thousands of them, literally thousands of them, maybe even millions, because there might be some we've never even known about. I know that it's in our nature, you know, it's to have this sort of belief system because it got us through a lot of our early formative years as human beings. But let's face it, guys, if you look at the history of what we would have called religions at one point, Nordic, Greek, Roman, whatever, even some of the Asian religions, and you just look at them and they scream out that they're mythologies, just stories. And a lot of them repeat or are borrowed from earlier stuff, right? Like the Noah's flood is a great example of that. And if you can't see that, if you're intentionally being blind to that fact, well, I don't really have much time for it. If you can't sit and talk about the possibility that it could all just be mythology without having your, being upset by that, what can I do? I mean, that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I talk about it.
I think that's an understandable perception. And I think it's important that like in my conversations with people who are like, especially polytheists, because I'm friends with folks like Ocean and like his group of friends, and I really like them. But like there's some folks in that
they're good people.
Like there are some folks in that camp who demand more from atheists than they are willing to do themselves, which is really frustrating because they're just like, you have to respect our traditions. And I'm just like, cool, I can do that. I can think there's a possibility your beliefs are true. I can think there's a possibility you guys are correct. I don't believe you guys are correct, but I can I can acknowledge the possibility I might be wrong. And something that frustrates me is I freely admit this, but I've never heard some of the people who ask me this admit the same thing.
No, I know. I get the same thing. I'm willing to, hey, sure. Is it possible? Well, we can't 100% rule it out. We can't 100% anything, really, if you think about it. But we can't rule it out. But so far, like if it was a magic 8-ball situation, you shake that thing and it would say signs are not looking good, right? That kind of thing. So I've never used a magic 8-ball analogy before. That's really weird. But it's, you know what I mean, right?
Magic 8-ball.
You've never used one?
I know what they are, but I've never used one.
Oh, they're fun. They're silly. I had one. Somebody bought me one when I first told them that I was, this is years ago in the 90s. And they bought me one. It's a little one, about that big, and I would just fart around with it. And I'd have people ask me questions, and I'd turn it over and go, there's your answer. And we're all getting drunk or whatever and just having a good laugh over it. Of course, none of that stuff I believe at all. I used to some other shit like psychics and mediums, and oh my goodness, don't even get me started. Until I realized that they were charlatans and ripping people off at that desperate and helpless times, which really bothered me eventually. All right, man. Well, what do you say we close this off? And I'm going to go and use the facilities and have my usual between stream cigarette and grab another fresh, ice cold beer, and we'll get the after party happening. And guys, we're going to keep it to about an hour because I got to go out and see my sister to hang out with her.
I think an hour is a good amount of time for me too, so that way I can like try to hammer out more of this paper before I go to bed.
There you go. Yeah, because I guess it's getting a little later. You're like 4 hours away from me.
Yeah, I'm currently 10 where I live.
Yeah, and it's just coming up on 7 now. So for me here. Well, Luciano, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I anticipated a good little chat, and we heard some great little stories from you. And thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it because I think that these kind of stories should be heard. Because they can help people really that are on the fence or having doubts. Not all the stories are always good, guys. Remember that. Like we were actually talking here, some people end up being disowned by friends and family, and I think that that's really shitty that happens, but not everyone's as understanding. So again, man, happy birthday again, and thanks so much for coming on and doing this with me. And thank everyone for tuning in and watching. I hope you enjoyed. And very soon we're going to be doing another live stream for about an hour, a little after party. So stick around or tune into that. I'll probably tweet out a link. Any final things you want to say? Like anything you want? Let people know about your channel and your blog site. And actually, you'll have to message me so I can put that in the description as well. For the blog site, I already have your channel there.
Cool. So, hi everyone. I am Luciano's Logic. I guess I'll do a really, really quick introduction. I do videos about humanism and like things that I find interesting. So, humanism, justice, and peace and conflict studies, and some history. I write and talk about a whole bunch of stuff. I'm mostly active on Twitter than I am. I'm a lot more active on Twitter than I am on like YouTube. So if you want to chat with me, definitely check out Twitter as opposed to YouTube. But if you subscribe to my channel, I'll really appreciate it. Plus, I'm working on getting more active, so hopefully there'll be more stuff soon. Bye, everyone.
You better, mister. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll be back up running live probably within the next 7-8 minutes. So
yeah,
we'll see you then.